is the goal to be doing well in like a slam or getting compliments after the show. It is not something that's up to chance. Like, it does take effort. It does take, I mean, I guess there's elements of luck in, like, you didn't do anything wrong there. It's not a lack of talent or skill. It's like a lack of...
All right. Christina, thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you for inviting me.
How do you feel?
I feel pretty good.
Okay. We could change that.
And you will.
Tell me, how did you think about putting that set together that you did?
So I noticed that I had scheduled my set for St. Patrick's Day, and I love a theme. And so I figured, because I don't often intentionally get to put like multiple poems together with one uniting theme, and so I figured it would be kind of a good excuse to do that. And I realized that I did have some poems that very directly talk about like luck and fortune, and then some that tangentially relate to it. So I thought that was like a broad enough theme that I could work with that.
Mm-hmm. So what kinds of dimensions related to luck or related to the theme in general do you feel like you hit?
So I think like with the first one, the B one, there's kind of just the element of like chance and like statistics. And I think the second one was like quite literally about like the kind of mythical character related to fortune who kind of like balances the scales and is in charge of luck and kind of talks about like what is in versus out of her control. I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, and then the other one was kind of about the 21 one was kind of about the experience of like being told that you're lucky in a moment where you don't feel particularly lucky, but then like reflecting on it after the fact and kind of being like, oh, that does make sense, seeing it from that perspective. And then like the coin flipping one was another kind of literal, like addressing luck and statistics. And then the last one, I was just thinking about like, okay, that theme, and it's going to be St. Patrick's Day. And so I was thinking about wanting to do something with like Lucky Charms, and like the forgotten marshmallows came to mind. And then I was like, okay, what are other things that have kind of been like lost by time but still are like remembered by people, and that idea of like you don't have to be like good and memorable and extraordinary for people to like remember you.
Okay. Do you think that's the pressure a lot of people have?
I think so. I think artists.
It's interesting you said, because I wanted to talk more about the relationship between art and luck, since that was kind of
yeah.
So like, what kind of role do you think artists view luck as having in their work?
I think it really depends on the artist, but I would say a lot think of it as having a relatively small role. I would think in like work, like I think it is not something that's up to chance. Like it does take effort. It does take, I mean, I guess there's elements of luck in like what are your natural talents, but I do feel like writing is something people can really build on, even if they don't start out feeling confident about it. And so I think that element is not luck. I do think there can be maybe elements of luck with any sort of art and like how far it can take you, just depending on like what community you have access to and like who you're exposed to, how much you get to share your work, things like that.
You mentioned that you feel like writing is something that can be built on that isn't luck.
Yeah.
Can you speak more to that? Why is that not an element of art that is dependent on luck?
I think just I've seen firsthand, and I think like being part of a writing community or going to a show for like 10 plus years, you see poets like grow, and you see people start out as like not maybe something necessarily super memorable, and then they become one of your favorite poets. And like, yeah, to me, I think there is effort being put in behind the scenes there, and like you see people like practicing their poems, you see people edit their poems, and like those things I think are not up to chance.
What would you say to a poet who gets discouraged because they feel like they're putting in the time, but they're not seeing the results they're looking for?
I think I'd have questions about like what the results they're looking for are. because I'm very into also like poets who have their own unique kind of style, or like even just like specific topic matter, and it may not always be what the audience wants or likes depending on like where they're going. So I think about like my open mic, and like we have people that like have certain writing styles that are very distinct, or certain topics that are very distinct, and like I think a lot of those things are very up to just the preference of the audience. And so I think you can feel like, oh, it's not working, but maybe it's not working with the preferences of the audience that you're speaking to. And so I'd be curious, like, is the goal to be doing well in like a slam or getting compliments after the show? Or is the goal to be published in a literary magazine? Because maybe with something like that, you can find something that aligns with your style. Yeah, and I mean, I think if someone was looking for like specific advice, that's maybe different. Like I think listening to more poets that you enjoy and being in more different spaces and things like that can be helpful for improving the craft. But I think sometimes it may not even be about needing to change anything about the way that you make art. It might just be like there's just a disconnect between what people are liking right now and what you're doing.
If we encounter a disconnect like that, what do you think is the move to do?
Like as like a consumer of the art, or as like the person making it?
I'm thinking more as like from the creator perspective.
Yeah. I think, again, it depends on what their goal is. I think oftentimes we want kind of a mix of both, to be expressing ourselves and feel like genuine to our personal style, but then also still wanting, I think it feels good to get that positive feedback, and like it does tell you something maybe meaningful if a lot of people are enjoying your work, or it's like a lot of people can relate to it. So if you're someone who like that's not part of your goal, I think just keep maybe doing what you're doing if it's not like offensive and hateful. But if it's if part of your goal is to like have your work really speak to people and that they like it, I don't know, I think talking to poets, even just like after a show, and maybe noticing elements of their work that you like and kind of talking to them about like their writing process to get there. Yeah, I think paying attention to other poets can be really helpful, and yeah, maybe just seeking feedback, because sometimes people aren't necessarily like jumping to give it readily, but if you ask, they'll kind of tell you, oh, here's things I liked, here's things that like I feel like I would maybe do differently or take a look at.
What are some elements that you feel like a poet does have control over?
I think what their intention, I guess, like, is when they're writing the work, who their, like, maybe target audience is, even though you can't necessarily control who you end up speaking to. I think, I mean, you can choose, like, what communities you become a part of and, like, what spaces you're attending, who you're reading, and kind of picking up on stylistic elements from. Yeah, I think a lot of things other than sometimes how it's received or who it's being received by.
What kinds of goals do you see poets at your show have? So you've been running a show now, or part of the team running a show for a little while. What are some things that you've noticed in terms of the goals of the poets who are attending?
Yeah, I think a lot of them have started, I've noticed, like, personal projects kind of coming up, a lot of chapbooks, and so sometimes even as they're kind of writing the chapbook, they might be like reading the poems for the first time to us, and kind of sometimes getting feedback afterwards in conversation. I noticed some people really working on like performance elements, like possibly gaining interest in like slam and things like that, and kind of practicing like memorizing and being able to perform more confidently, kind of playing around with how they're saying the different lines and things like that. I think some people, it's maybe picking like a certain form and kind of becoming sort of like an expert at that. Like we have poets who will read like sonnets or like rhyming poems consistently and kind of trying to kind of have that niche that they occupy. And then I think some people are just there for the self-expression of it, and the goal isn't necessarily to like improve per se by any particular standard, but just like they write and it feels good to share it.
How lucky are you as a poet?
I would say fairly lucky. Like, I think the same things apply. Like, I don't want to talk too much shit about myself. I do think I still like work on my poetry, but I do think there was luck in finding the community that I found, in a very literal sense of how I found writer's block and kind of got back into poetry after like very casually writing it in high school and then kind of stopping, was that my roommate at the time was at was on High Street wandering around, and then the whole city, there was like a citywide power outage, and so most of the restaurants and bars were shut down, but Cafe Kerouac was open. And so she went in there, and writer's block was going on. It was a Wednesday at 8. And so she went and watched the show because there was nothing else to do. And then she told me about it. She was like, "You're going to love this. You got to come here." And so I did. And then I started coming back week after week. And that was like a very literal element of like, this was just a chance thing. I mean, and I may have found it eventually, but I don't know. Like, I think Zach Hanna has a poem that has a quote somewhere in there that talks about like luck and timing. And I think it was that like combination of things. Like, also, if I had found that maybe years later, would I have still cared about poetry? Would I have still had the time? Would my Wednesday nights still be free and go check it out week after week? So I think there was an element of that. And then I think that show and just being around poets every week was critical to me even continuing to pursue poetry.
I guess I have a final question, and if other people have questions they can ask. Do you think it's possible to be unlucky as a poet?
I would say, one, I just kind of believe that I kind of do believe in like some elements of luck just being a thing. Like, some people do seem to just have good, like some of my friends and I joke, like good luck stats, like it's D&D, but just kind of have that tendency, like even if you're entering a raffle or playing a game and you have those friends who you're like, oh, they tend to win every time. And I don't know if that's scientifically true, but I do think that can be a thing in general, and so I think that can probably apply to poets as well. I think, again, like when I go back to that experience of like happening to kind of stumble upon writer's block at a time where I had interest and space in my life for that, like I think that was something that could have not happened, and that would maybe be unlucky in the sense that I don't know if I'd really be writing poetry a lot. And I do think as far as getting, like, if your goal is to become well-known or renowned or published, I do think that, like, identities can play a piece there. And, like, if you're in a marginalized identity but you're in a space that maybe isn't welcoming of that, like, that's something that may kind of be an unlucky, like you didn't do anything wrong there. It's not a lack of talent or skill. It's like a lack of having the community that you need or the openness that you need. So yeah, I think there are elements in that sense.
Christina, for being here.
Yeah, thank you all for being here.